Ladies and gentlemen, according to the clock on the wall, it's 5 p.m. I'll call the meeting to the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board to order, please. Can I have a roll call?
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Lukens? Is not here. Mr. Apperson?
Here.
Mr. Dunn?
Here.
And I understand Mr. Gussman is participating remotely. Mr. Gussman, are you here?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, I'm going to ask the chair, we need a motion to allow Mr. Gussman to participate remotely.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I'm sorry, we just need a motion to allow Mr. Gussman to participate remotely.
Make the motion, Mr. Rowley, please.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we allow Mr. Gussman to participate remotely.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
According to my schedule here, I'm called to order. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries to the Chesapeake Bay. Minutes are up to be discussed. Any corrections or additions?
Nope.
Minutes stand approved as read. Mr. Haley, you approve? Moving on to item D, public hearings. Case CBPA 20-0132, 4 Mile Tree Road. Mr. Long, please.
I can't hear Mr. Long's presentation.
Mayor, could you call a recess for technical difficulty?
A recess is in order, sir, as long as you need it. Mr. Long?
Mr. Gussman, can you hear us now?
Yes,
Mr. Long, can I have just a second? For the benefit of the folks in the audience, Mr. Gussman is the chairman of the board and is attending the meeting from his home tonight electronically. I'm the vice chair. I don't normally run the meeting for him, but this is why what we're working on now, one of our members is attending the meeting electronically. And thank you for your patience. Yes, sir, Mr. Long.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, James City County Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA 20-0132. Mr. Brian and Ms. Stacy Solano have applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer with the construction of 2 retaining walls on property located at 128 4 Mile Tree within the Riverview Plantation subdivision in the Skimino Creek watershed. Parcel was platted in 1969 before the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance in 1990. Total lot size of this property is 0.47 acres, of which 94% is located within the RPA. The applicant appeared before this board on January 15, 2020, and was approved for the construction of a single-family dwelling. The addition of 2 retaining walls is now being proposed in order to alleviate grading and erosion and sediment control issues that the contractor is currently experiencing. The first retaining wall is proposed to extend 11 feet within the seaward 50-foot RPA, and the second retaining wall is proposed to extend 36 square feet within the landward 50-foot RPA. Total impacts to the RPA equal 47 square feet. Therefore, mitigation requirements for this amount of impervious impacts equal the plantings of 3 shrubs. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of 2 retaining walls. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the retaining walls are accessory in nature and 1 retaining wall extends into the seaward 50-foot RPA. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony and with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels. And reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that it meets all 5 of the conditions presented above. Should the board also find the exception request meets all 5 of the conditions above, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. A mitigation plan consisting of 3 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. A surety of $250 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. And that this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by December 9th, 2021, with written requests for an extension to this exception be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than October 28th, 2021, just 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this exception request. I'll now present a brief presentation. Again, this is CBPA 20-0132. 128 4 Mile Tree. The applicant is requesting to construct 2 retaining walls. The vicinity map above showing the subject parcel here in blue within the Skimino Creek watershed, 4 Mile Tree, the Riverview Plantation subdivision. An aerial photo of the parcel in question, which currently has house construction ongoing. Topography, showing a ravine on the side and sloping back towards the resource. Floodplain as it affects this property. And the resource protection area, showing the majority of this parcel being encapsulated by RPA. Site plan has been submitted to this office. The first line in red here being the 100-foot resource protection area, and the back line being the 50-foot resource protection area. Both these lines in yellow indicate the retaining walls that are being proposed. The first retaining wall here in the landward 50-foot, and the second one here being in the seaward 50-foot. Essentially, these retaining walls are to alleviate the grading issues and to provide stability for construction access and safety. Site photographs that were taken, again, this is the house that's under construction, and the approximate location of the retaining wall affecting the seaward 50-foot RPA. Backing up, showing the retaining wall in the landward 50-foot. From the opposite direction, looking back up towards, again, the landward 50-foot RPA retaining wall. And paralleling the shoreline with the seaward 50-foot retaining wall. Should the board recommend, should also find that this is approvable, the applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. That a mitigation plan equating to 3 shrubs be submitted to this office. That a surety of $250 in a form acceptable to the James City County's Attorney's Office be submitted. And that this exception request become null and void if construction has not begun by December 9th, 2021. The written request for an extension submitted to this office no later than October 28th, 2021, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Questions? Mr. Long, you mentioned that the purpose or the intent is to create a stable area to get around the house, or is there an erosion problem, or is this an access issue?
It's my understanding that there is there's an erosion issue with the current construction. I'll let the contractor speak more to that matter.
Okay, that'll close the questions for the staff. This time I'd like to open the public hearing. If anyone is in the audience who wishes to speak to this project, please come forward.
I would like a little clarity on the intended need for the retaining walls.
Topography is such that
We need you to please identify yourself, please.
my
sir.
name is Fred Nice. I'm the builder for the Solanos.
Right.
The topography is such where it's a drastic drop off. It's a basement. It's an unoccupied basement, but we used the topography was so steep that we have an unfinished basement for storage down below, and it's the way that the drainage is, the retaining wall just makes perfect sense just to keep with the erosion. Otherwise, we'll just constantly have to worry about sheet flow of water that's constantly naturally going from one end of the house to the other.
Right.
It's pretty drastic. If you were out there, I think you'd agree.
Are you able to, are the retaining walls going to do any treatment of themselves? I mean, do you have any gravel behind them? Or are they going to be able to intercept some of that sheet flow? And
Yes, yeah, they will. And there'll be block construction with.
are you
drain
using
tile
articulated block?
No, it's the interlocking pavestone. Randy Coleman does a lot of those for a lot of your projects, actually. But so it's
How tall is that roughly, those walls?
at the highest it'll be 6 feet, and that's just the one on the front, landward 50, and then the one in the back is like 4 feet. And the one in the back is 10 or 11 feet long, and the one on the front is 35, 40 feet, something like that.
Thank you.
Back to your question, sir. In one of the slides that we saw, it appeared that a lot of fill had come already down to the silt fence. There's a line of trees there that have got 2 or 3 foot of fill around them already. Is your wall going on the inside or the outside of those trees with respect to the river? Would the trees be inside the wall or outside the wall?
Yes. Yeah, no more, yes.
I didn't hear you, I'm sorry.
the wall will be inside, no more trees are coming down, and the wall will be inside of the trees that are there now.
So you're gonna pull the field back away from these trees now than when you build the wall.
Yeah,
The point
and-
is that the plants will probably be suffocated, and the homeowner will have to pay a fee in 10 years to pay for the trees, to have them taken down when they die. So I would suggest now that that be taken into account.
Yeah.
You know, move it back far enough so that the trees stay healthy, at least have some room to grow. The roots won't be smothered. That would be my concern. Thank you. Okay, if don't see any more questions, we'll close the public hearing. Have a discussion about the staff. What do y'all think?
You know, in looking at this, I can see the grade. I mean, I'm not seeing the erosion problem, but I trust Mr. Nice as he described the grade transition, and that we would have potentially a future erosion problem that we typically see in these situations. It appears to me that the retaining walls have been tucked fairly close to the structures, and so they're minimizing their encroachment channelward to the maximum extent practicable. So I'm generally in support of this.
Because Mr. Nice, do you understand his comments as what he's talking about there, about moving away back close to the structures you can? Is that okay with you? Okay. Mr. Dunn?
I concur with Mr. Rodley.
Discussion, we're ready to vote.
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board Case CBPA-20-0132.
Okay.
So we'll get Mr. Gusman's vote now.
Yes,
A roll call? Sorry, you ready for a roll call?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry. Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Gusman?
yes,
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
It's granted. Thank you. Moving on, case CBPA 20-0120, 3464 Hunters Ridge, retaining wall, fill, and paver pad. Mr. Wilson.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson here, Senior Watershed Planner, to present case CBPA 20-0120 at 3468 Hunters Ridge. Mr. Michael and Linda Vergakis and Ms. Linda Vergakis have applied for Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for construction of retaining wall, fill, and a paver pad to park utility trailer on property located at 3468 Hunters Ridge within the Powhatan Creek watershed. Property is further identified as James City County Tax Map Parcel 46213-00024. Parcel was platted in 1987 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance. The applicant has experienced subsidence in the rear of the property. For this reason, they're proposing a 39-foot retaining wall in order to protect the structural integrity of the house. Beyond the retaining wall, the applicant is proposing to fill in the depressed area in order to better stabilize the yard. There's approximately 500 square feet of fill associated with the proposal. Further, the proposal would remove one tree and the rest of the filled area is turf grass. Additionally, the applicant is proposing a 12 by 16 foot area to be utilized as a trailer, utility trailer pad on the property. The total impervious impacts for the RPA equals 231 square feet. The required mitigation for this amount of impervious cover is one canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. The area of fill will also need to be stabilized appropriately. Staff evaluated the application and the exception request for the construction of the retaining wall, fill, and paver pad. The application does meet the ordinance requirements in sections 2311 and 2314 and should be heard before the board because the retaining wall and paver pad are considered accessory in nature. Staff's view of the application is that it does meet all 5 of the conditions as outlined in the ordinance and is approvable. Should the board find that the exception request meet all 5 of those conditions, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into that approval. That the applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. A mitigation plan equaling the planting of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs or their equivalent be submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. A surety of $500 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. That the exception request become null and void if construction is not begun by December 9, 2021, and that written requests for extensions to the exception shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than October 28, 2021, 6 weeks prior to that expiration date. If I could turn your attention to the screens in front of you for the presentation. Michael and Linda Vergakis at 3468 Hunters Ridge are proposing the construction of a retaining wall, paver pad, and some fill. The subject parcel within the Powhatan Crossing subdivision, 3468 Hunters Ridge, within the Powhatan Creek watershed. Aerial photograph of the property showing the house location. I do want to point out one thing, and this photograph here highlights that clearly. The GIS property lines, the ones outlined in blue, are offset slightly from the location of the property pins in the field. This is a fence here that is on the property line. Just want to make sure the board understands that those property lines as shown are slightly off. Sanitary sewer, as it is laid out in the subdivision, it does run at the rear of this property. There is a 20-foot easement, 10-foot side easement, and 20-foot rear easement on that sewer line on the Vergakis' property. Topography of the site, it slopes from the street down to the creek that's at the rear of the property. There is a flowing stream in this area of the property on Powhatan Plantation property. The RPA as it affects this property comes up into the house. That RPA again was implemented in 2004 when the ordinance was revised to redefine perennial streams. And again, the house was built in 1987. From the site plan the Vergakis is submitted, the proposed retaining wall in yellow, proposed area fill here. In this area, this is a tree that, and I'll let Mr. Vergakis explain if this tree is going to be removed or not. Staff has no opinion on whether it should stay. But this is the area of subsidence that will be filled. Proposed paver pad here. This line work here is just showing the construction access and is not considered impervious. Once the project is done, it will be stabilized. A couple photographs from the project site. The retaining wall is going in this location here. This is the area of subsidence that will be filled. And then you can actually see the utility trailer in the background up against the fence that denotes the property line between the adjacent property. And that's the area of the paver pad that they would like. Up close to the existing deck, you can see some erosion that is occurring over time. Those footers have become exposed. The concrete stoop has become exposed, and that retaining wall would be just to the left of this in this location. And then further over, you can see some subsidence at the area of the steps coming down from the deck off there to the right of the photograph. And then to the left in this photograph, again, is the area of subsidence that they would like to fill and restabilize. And then the paver pad area for the utility trailer. Again, should the board approve this exception request, staff would recommend these following conditions: that all other necessary federal, local, and state permits are required. Mitigation plan consisting of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs be submitted to our office. That a surety of $500 in a form acceptable to the county attorney's office be submitted to ensure the mitigation components. That the application is null and void if not started. The exception request would be null and void if not started by December 9, 2021. And that any extension request to extend that be submitted to our office by October 28th, 2021, 6 weeks prior to that expiration date. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have regarding this application.
Mr. Chairman, the questions I have pertain to the area of subsidence, and I don't know if staff can answer that or if they would rather the applicant answer it.
I would defer those questions to the applicant, please.
Thank you.
Questions? I have no questions.
So, Mike, just to make for clarity, the only impervious surface that's proposed is the pavers for the trailer and the retaining wall itself.
Correct.
This time I'd like to open the public hearing. Anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to this application, please come forward. Excuse me just a second. David, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you fine.
I apologize.
Very clear.
To ask if you had an opinion on the last case, and it looks like I've overlooked you on this one also. I can reopen this questions for the staff if you have any now. It's hard for me.
No,
I just didn't think about you when we were doing this, that's all.
no, sir. No questions. Pretty straightforward.
Okay, thank you. At this time, we'll go ahead with the public hearing and your comments. You need to identify yourself.
All right. Good evening, Chairman, members of the board. I'm Michael Fergakis, one of the applicants for the property, and I'm happy to answer any questions best I can.
I was just curious, Mr. Gakis, about the area of subsidence. Did they dump some stumps there and it's now rotting over the years, or just curious?
The subsidence, I think is, and again, I'm not a geologist of any means, but I think there's an underground spring that is contributing to it. And right at the area where you're seeing on the screen now where that tree is more of a big dip hole. And what we're trying to do is just stabilize, but filling that equally from left to right. And slow the slope, if you will.
Curious, so this tree is going to come out?
Yes.
If you suspect an underground spring, I mean, those can be really problematic over time. Have you had anybody look at that to determine if that is the cause?
Well, there's a hole that's forming back by the sewer line. I had the people from the sewer come out and check it. And when they put the dye in there, it actually came out downstream into the creek area.
It's not good.
No. So that's what I'm trying to do here is provide some stability to the property.
So are you on septic?
No. I'm connected to the sewer. It's in the back of the property. Between where all we're doing the work is the sanitary sewer easement.
Yeah, that's right.
And then the creek area. We're trying to stabilize upstream of the sewer easement.
I appreciate you keeping the retaining wall fairly tight to the structure. That helps reduce that encroachment. I don't have a problem with this. I'm not 100% certain that your solution is going to fix the problem, but I'm sympathetic to your plight.
I'm just trying to put back, been there for 20 years now. I'm just trying to put back what we have lost in 20 years. Thank you, gentlemen.
Ask you a question very quickly. I'm curious, the ground cover around the tree. Did you plant that, or is that a volunteer grant?
It's all volunteer. Even the tree was volunteer.
Thank you.
Yeah, he said we're actually removing 2 trees. I planted an apple tree in the back that's not surviving, so.
That looks
that'll
like
be
a maple
removed.
tree, near as I can tell from the slide. It's a stump spread problem from where the original tree was cut, and this tree is spreading back up from the stump. It looks from here, it looks like a maple.
There was a tree there that was taken out in Isabel.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I do have one quick question for you. So the paver pad in the back is accessory in nature, and I was just wanting to see, would you consider using, instead of impervious pavers, using something that's impervious to water?
Well, the utility trailer itself already sheds water, so we were just trying to put stability underneath the trailer.
Would you consider using impervious paver for your project? So that
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that if we can get that. But we were just trying to match the pavers that we were going to use up underneath the deck. So it just looked the same.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to this application? If not, we'll close the public hearing. Your feeling?
Mr. Gussman, do you have any comment?
No, I'm okay with the project.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, again, I appreciate their being able to tuck the retaining wall as close to the house as possible. I would encourage the applicant to, before they start bringing fill in, to make sure that's going to fix the problem. But I appreciate what you're trying to do. I'm a little concerned if you've got a underground spring that's not going to solve. I mean, it may solve it temporarily, but I'm going to think about. But otherwise, I'm generally in favor of the project.
I share your concerns with the underground spring, and I base my concerns on the fact that the vegetation here almost looks to me to be an aquatic plant that I'm familiar with, that I've never seen growing up on high ground. And that indicates to me that there is a spring there, or there is an abnormal amount of water there. So my suggestion, along with Mr. Rhodes here, is be sure that you're not capping off something that's going to come back, and cost you much, much more money later. I would suggest to be sure there's not a spring there before you fill in over top. But that's all the problem I have with it. I don't want to see you spend a lot of money for nothing and then have to come back and redo it all over again.
In this case, you might consider a geotechnical engineer just to do a site inspection. I don't know that it would cost a great deal, but they might be able to render an opinion.
That area right there, it looks wet because on the day they came out, it was raining. But that vegetation, again, I don't think it is an aquatic type vegetation. It's more like a fern, undergrowth fern, that we just left it there instead of trying to mow, because it actually helped stabilize that little bit of area. The spring that I noticed is closer to, it's between the utility trailer and this underground area. It's not directly underneath this.
Gotcha. I misunderstood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Question? Please vote. Motion.
All right, I make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board Case CBPA 20-0120 at 3468 Hunters Ridge.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes,
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
It's granted, folks. Moving on, CBPA 20-0105-2148 Benamo
Drive shed, Mr. Long.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, James County Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA 20-0105. Ms. Tabitha and Mr. Robert Partlow have applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a shed on property located at 2148 Bonomi Drive within the Palegs Point subdivision and the Mill Creek watershed. Parcel was platted in 2002 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. The applicants are proposing to construct an approximate 8-foot by 12-foot shed equaling a total of 150 square feet of impervious cover within the landward 50-foot RPA. Therefore, there is a 20-foot drainage easement that affects this lot and a conservation easement covering the area of the RPA. To date, the applicants have not proposed any mitigation plantings. However, the required mitigation for this amount of impact would be the planting of 3 shrubs. In August 2018, this case was heard and approved by the board. The shed was not built during the required time frame of the approval, and the approval expired. In January 2020, the board heard a similar case where the shed was proposed in the RPA and the conservation easement. Staff determined that it could be placed outside of the RPA. This case is similar in that the shed location may be adjusted to the north in the side yard of the lot, outside of the RPA and conservation easement, and further outside of the floodplain. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a shed and finds that the application meets the conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14, and that the application should be heard by the board because the proposed shed is considered accessory in nature. Therefore, this request must be considered by the board following a public hearing under the formal exception process. Board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is a minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code, to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances, either permitted or non-conforming, that are related to adjacent parcels. Reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Should the board find that this exception request meets all 5 of the conditions above, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicants must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project, including homeowners association approval. The applicants submit a mitigation plan equaling 3 shrubs and a $250 surety to guarantee the plantings. That this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by December 9th, and that written requests for an extension to this exception be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than October 28th, 2021, just 6 weeks prior to the date of this expiration. Now, divert your attention for a brief presentation. Again, Ms. Tabitha and Robert Partlow are applying for a Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance exception for the construction of a new shed on property located at 2148 Bonomi Drive, highlighted above on the vicinity map in blue. Aerial photograph showing the parcel and the approximate location of the project. Topography as it affects this lot, sloping off into the wetlands in the rear of this property. The floodplain as it affects this property. And the resource protection area as it affects this property. Site plan that has been submitted in red. Here is the resource protection area. And here in yellow, the proposed shed. Building setback has been drawn here in orange. A drainage easement that also affects this property. And some site photographs illustrating the approximate location of the shed. Picture looking back towards the house. towards the side of the yard. Should the board wish to approve this project, the following permit conditions should be incorporated. All other necessary local, state, and federal permits are acquired as necessary. That a mitigation plan consisting of 3 shrubs and a surety of $250 in a form acceptable to James City County Attorney's Office to ensure the mitigation plantings be submitted to this office. And this exception request become null and void if not started by December 9th, 2021, with an extension request submitted no later than October 28th, 2021, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Trevor, can you go back to the aerial photograph that shows the RPA limits?
Sir.
Right there. I'm just curious, given the extensive wetland to the left, what stops the RPA at this point?
Excellent question, Mr. Oatley. And I have an answer for you. The wetland system to the left on this photo is a BMP. There is no perennial stream feeding that feature, and well, this photo doesn't show it well. This feature right here is the embankment for that BMP.
Thank you. And Mr. Long, in your presentation, you made reference to the fact that we approved a shed in this location previously.
That's correct, yes, sir. This exact application came before the board and was approved, but their approval expired and have now reapplied.
And so the other sheds that you mentioned that were similar in nature were not on this property.
That is correct. The other shed referenced was an example occurring between the time of the original application and this application request that was similar and had further controversy surrounding it.
Your observation in terms of locations that could potentially be, that they could utilize would be the side yard to the left of the house?
Yes, sir. As the photo currently is situated to the left of the house, staff was originally under the impression that HOA requirements would restrict this. However, there's a possibility that is not necessarily the case, and therefore the side of the house may be a viable option.
We don't know that for certain.
That's correct, yes, sir.
Thank you.
There was a conservation easement on this as well.
Yes, sir, Mr. Dunn. The conservation easement is effectively covering the RPA in this case, so it doubles. And it is also called out in the site plan right here.
Can you show the standoff again? The property lines.
Yes, property line and building setback here in orange.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, staff would like to propose an additional condition that should the shed be approved in the location shown, that it also obtain approval from the easement holder. That would be a similar condition to the approval from last year that occurred in the shed case that Mr. Long mentioned in the staff report.
Stated in your presentation, though, that you have the opinion that the shed can be moved to the side yard. I'll be sure I'm clear with that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Questions? This time, then, I'd like to open the public hearing. If anyone here would speak to this application, please come forward. For one, I will close the public hearing. Comments?
Well, Mr. Chairman, given our past action on this property, we have somewhat of a precedence for the approval. But this case is being heard on its own merits today. It appears, based on its location, that this is a garden shed, not necessarily heavily trafficked. But I appreciate staff's position that it could potentially be located in the side yard and completely out of the RPA. Just an observation.
Councilman, do you have something you'd like to say, like to add?
No.
Thank you, sir.
I'd see that it looks like it can be moved. It doesn't look like it needs to be in the RPA at all.
Based on what I see here presented to me right now, I'm of that opinion also. And my vote would be to move it to the side shed. We've with other cases, and as Mr. Rhoda said, this is a new application. Things are different, and we're doing things differently now than we did before. And I would prefer my vote to be moved to the side shed.
Mr. Chairman, can we ask staff's opinion in the event that, well, actually, I don't know that that's even possible. But my thought was if we deny or do not approve this application and they are not allowed via the HOA to put it in the side yard, would you then have to reapply to the board for approval in its current location?
On the head, yes. I think that's what you're saying.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
If the board is leaning towards a denial and the fact that the applicant is not present tonight, I'd suggest, if we're allowed, that we defer the case, allow staff to contact the applicant and get some clarification on the HOA issue.
Appreciate that advice.
I have no problem at all with that. Mr. Dunn, do you?
Never mind.
Mr. Gusman, do you have any problem with that?
Mr. Chair, that request can only come from the applicant, not from staff. I apologize.
Does that mean that we cannot defer now for a while for more information to be gathered? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
We have to have a
you
vote
have to
now.
act on the case.
Okay. That's what we're here for then. Do you have a motion?
I apologize for the confusion.
That's okay. No problem.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a motion to deny the request based on our desire collectively to have a little more information about whether or not the HOA would in fact approve a shed at the side yard completely outside of the RPA. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move to motion to deny the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA-20-0120. Oops, wrong one. Excuse me. I had to turn my page over. Motion to deny the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA-20-0105 at 2148 Bonomi Drive.
Okay, we have a roll call on that, please?
Mr. Rodley,
Yes.
Mr. Apperson,
Yes.
Mr. Gussman,
Yes.
Mr. Dunn.
Yes.
Thank you. On special board considerations, do we have anything that you want to bring up? Anything from you, Mr. Wilson? Special privilege, anything you want to bring up, sir?
Just want to let the board know there will be a Wetlands Board and a Chesapeake Bay Board meeting on January 13th. At that time, Carter's Grove will be proposing a living shoreline project and some RPA modifications along the shoreline. If any board member would like to go visit the site, please let staff know. We will arrange a visit.
I would like to go.
I will get up with you, sir, via email.
Else?
Mike, I would also like to attend.
I'd like to see that.
All right.
That's it, then I guess we have a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Have a Merry Christmas, David.
Thank you. Thank you for your cooperation with us. I appreciate it.
Glad to do it. Glad to do it. See you later.
Mr. Anderson, thank you also for your technical